not familiar, Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis, so he's a therapist. Karl Marx was a philosopher and a political theorist. We're all pretty familiar with Marxism. And then Nietzsche was a German philosopher. He doesn't actually go in that much detail about them, other than to say he calls them the masters of suspicion in regard to the human person. And so he kind of compares like their view of the human person and of concupiscence with what Christ has to say. And so he says that like they all seem to actually believe in this threefold concupiscence. They each sort of like focus on a particular piece of that in their explanation of the human person, but they kind of stop there, right? They kind of seem just resigned, kind of like what you were saying too, like resigned to the fact that this is how we're made, and don't really look further. Like, for example, Freud says that we're ruled by our drives and that all our behavior is just an effort to satisfy our drives. And John Paul II writes that, Christ does seem to affirm that if the man who looks to desire leaves himself at the mercy of the forces of nature, he can't avoid the influence of the concupiscence of the flesh. I think influence is the key word here, because that's not the end of the story. John Paul II argues that in the ethos of the redemption of the body, we are not doomed to be ruled by our drives. Thank goodness.
I loved, again, reflecting on the intention, what our Lord's bringing us to deepen our awareness. And again, I always think of the young people because, we're older now, so we've kind of looked at this and thought about it, had conversations and felt, and I look at our young people in society and I'm like, oh, I want that conversation started. So I do just really hope that our audience will spend time reflecting, as Rochelle said, interpersonally, and then have those conversations with the kids, because I think this is how culture changes, where we don't just swallow the Kool-Aid, where we actually look at what's beneficial, what's harmful, how are we actually living it out. We really aren't at the mercy of our fallen nature, that we have to, and again, look around and see that people are living it out differently, not necessarily in the movies, but look around in a real life experience, because it's how we relate with each other. I have used the language of grace more often because I recognize how it's changing me despite myself, and that our Lord really does show up as I pray for my family members. I see things changing because grace is real. So the strong reminder was on page 238, there's a real power that gushes forth from Christ's crucified and risen body to set us free from the domination of concupiscence. And so it made me reflect again. I go back to being a teacher of NFP and my real lived experience with couples that come to see us. Now, when we have couples that come, we're like, actually, we really want you to see the gift that abstinence is for you. That you're given in your cycle, you're giving these times to bond, but there's this time where you're fertile, and that's actually your sacred time. So what is our Lord asking you? Is he asking you to co-create with him, or is he asking you to embrace each other and love each other? That's your time to really carry the cross for each other, because together you're fertile and you're making a rational decision about what God is calling you to. So it makes the relationship deeper. And you know that you've given yourself for the other, for the sake of the other. And when I look back on my marriage, two things happened. That phase 2 time, that fertile time, is a very much like a dating time. We look at each other, there's an energy between us because we're responding to each other in different ways. So it really strengthens our relationship in that way. But then when we do use that time, that fertile time, when we co-create with our Lord, it changes the honoring and the respect of what we have between each other. So in that way, and in those conversations, I think it helps me look at the culture differently. And then we have those conversations with our children, and I see that they're more open to what chastity is. And even as in their marriage, you can still be chaste. So that conversation is very far-reaching, and these are just some of the components that I've discovered in living these teachings.
That's beautiful.
The main quote that stuck out for me was on page 313 of the text, and it said, "Man must feel himself called to rediscover, or even better, to realize the spousal meaning of the body and to express in this way the interior freedom of the gift. That is, the freedom of the spiritual state and power that derive from mastery over the concupiscence of the flesh in all aspects of our lives. John Paul II is asking us and leading us to what he calls an inner call. And I loved praying about that and reflecting on that, but really like listening to that innermost echo of our heart. We've been talking about this a lot, but it goes back to the beginning. So although we are fallen, we have struggles because we're post-fall, we're in historical man, we can remember those original experiences that we kind of covered last episode or revisited last episode. And it reminds us like who we were created to be. So why were we created? And on page 314, he states that we are called precisely to this supreme value. Wow, that's elevated, isn't it? You're a supreme value. Have a great day at school, okay? That's true, though. And so, we are called in that truth, which has been our inheritance from the beginning, because it's an inheritance of his heart. It's an inheritance of God's heart, and it's deeper than the sinfulness that we inherited. And that's what we have to remember. That's where our hope comes from. Like what we received from God when he created us, we are very good. That is more powerful than what Adam and Eve did by grasping the fruit. So our inheritance of who we are is more powerful than our sin, okay? Or even our temptation to sin. So we should not be discouraged. Again, I really feel like this is all a message of hope for us, that we can reach this level of mastery over lust or concupiscence. It is attainable. And so one of the most powerful little phrases that I have heard is like, do not empty the cross of its power. So a lot of people, think they're in this battle, and it does feel like a battle, but the battle has already been won, okay? So it's just our perception of where we are in the battle, right? Yes. But we forget, and I think we tend to go to, it's all up to me, without forgetting that we could say it's all up to him and he already won. So, let's just believe in that power of God's grace. And so, when we feel like it's hopeless, it's all up to me, that means we're not offering it up. And so one thing I would offer just as a practical is the Mary Undoer of Knots Novena. This has undid so many knots for me that appeared just too big, or it'll always be this way. I can't change other people. That's just the way they are. Or I will always struggle with this. This is just how I was made. So when those thoughts start to creep in, you can go to Mary, you can say the Mary Undoer of Knots Novena, you bring the knot to her, you restate it and ask for her intercession, and she brings it to Jesus, who has already won the battle. So hopefully that provides a little bit of hope for everyone.
Redemption is a truth, a reality, in the name of which man must feel himself called with effectiveness. And that effectiveness to me is that mastery over concupiscence, and what a beautiful thing it is. It made me think, okay, I play the piano a little bit, I play the flute a little bit, I play the guitar a little bit, and I'm just okay, it's one thing, I need to have a music score in front of me and everything. Those who have the mastery of music do not need a score. Yeah. They just play, and it is beautiful. It is like the truth about them has been released and has found a way to manifest itself in creation.
So good.
One time I was playing the flute, and a friend of mine who is a master at flute, we were playing, and he says, "Sister, just play the melody." And so I did. I just played the melody because that's what I could do. And he just played all the way around it. It sounded beautiful. It was just like the whole thing came to life. And like I could be a part of something so much greater. And I think that's what God is asking us to do. He's just asking us, he gave us rules, he gave us commandments, he gave us the truth about who we are, and that we are to give ourselves this gift. And if we just do those things, you kind of fake it till you make it. You do those things, then he will make everything else come alive. And it's just so beautiful. And then we can see we are part of a beautiful orchestra. And so I think that's when I think of the mastery of concupiscence, God is asking us to work against those things, but only because it brings great freedom. Instead of being under that cloud of suspicion, we're called forth to release a real energy that is filled with zeal and filled with love. And I think when we see the apostles, when we see saints who are just on fire for love of God, that's what we're seeing, that mastery. And so we're called to live the truth about our humanity. And when we can do that in true freedom and truth, we are living humanity at its finest.
I took a particular interest in John Paul II's comments about Freud, and that's because I also have a degree in psychology and I've practiced as a therapist. And so I'm aware of what John Paul II is kind of tapping into as far as a problem with psychology today. I mean, if we are, according to psychologists by nature, just ruled by our concupiscent desires and that can't be changed, then what does that mean for practicing therapy? And we see this as that, if that's the case, then we just need to accept all our feelings and all those desires to be affirmed in them, and just to find a way to live that out, right? And to be totally ourselves so that we can be happy. Ourselves. And you do you, basically, is kind of the mentality. And so how can we find psychological healing when we don't have a standard for what a healthy human being looks like? Right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, obviously, I'm all for therapy. But if your therapy doesn't include a deep examination of your heart and encourage the possibility of actual change and growth and healing, that just sounds really hopeless to me personally. And we are not without hope, as we keep saying. You just sum that up so beautifully, Katie. And Jesus has the power to actually change us. And so if you go to therapy, I just encourage you to choose someone who believes that. Who believes that there is hope of freedom. And if you're seeing someone who doesn't really care if you change, but they just want you to kind of go with whatever you are feeling, then
Just coping skills.
Yeah, coping skills, exactly. Maybe you need to find somebody else. And I've mentioned in this podcast before about Dr. Greg Bottero, who is a Catholic psychologist, and he has a wonderful podcast called Being Human. And I encourage you, I'll put a link to it again, to look at that, because he does a great job of kind of pinning down the problems with modern psychology and psychology that's not rooted in an anthropology that's true. So I'll put that link out there. And he has a great model for therapy that's really rooted in all of our beliefs about the human person. And there's a list of therapists that I got from the Theology of the Body Institute that I would be happy to put out there for you guys, people all over the country. I also personally know of some that are very rooted in this theology of the body, who would be wonderful. So I'm going to put all those resources out there for you guys if you're interested. And I just think more than ever, it's so important to be careful about who you choose to go see and whose hands you put your heart. I think that's super important. So that's kind of where I was going in my reflection.